So stock confinement really is just bringing livestock into either a sacrifice paddock or confined yards where those livestock can be fed, rather than having them walk across paddocks, burning energy and bearing up country during those dry periods. We can manage their feed and their energy use more concisely when they're confined to a smaller area, and protect the rest of the asset base.
Yeah, and it becomes particularly important, particularly when you're locking them up into these small areas, that really we're feeding to maintain or to improve or to hold those animals' conditions. So a lot of the times we're working on a restricted diet, and you know, depending on the different feeding systems, a lot of the time that'll take place over, you know, 1 or 2 days that you're giving that feed. Those animals, rather than wasting energy out in the paddock chasing around trying to get that extra feed, we're seeing a lot of energy savings by doing that, but also by restricting that diet, we're able to give them what they need. And by doing that also, we're protecting that country, and it's something that we've seen over the last few years that has really helped to protect some of this country, protect some of those perennial pasture-based systems, and stop some of the issues that we generally start seeing where paddocks have been bared off to a great extent, and all of a sudden we get those storm events that have just come through recently, or wind and the like. Sort of for triggers for farmers when they're looking at when should they use confinement feeding areas or move them into those sacrifice paddocks and the like, it really comes down to looking at your pastures, looking at your ground cover, but also looking at the different stages that the animals are in. If we're sort of in that stage where we've got cows in late pregnancy, ewes sort of in that pregnancy stage, a lot of time it's actually better just to lock them up leading into that calving and lambing. The triggers for me when I go out to a place is if I'm seeing the animals spending all day grazing, not meeting their requirements, sort of losing a bit of condition, that's a real good point to say time to lock them up. Get them out of those paddocks. You're starting to do damage to your perennial pastures and the like, you're doing damage to the soil and the like. Just bring them back in and start to give them what they need.
It's probably even a first step to destocking, so rather than having to sell those animals straight up off the bat, you can actually bring them in and destock your pastures, feed them in confinement, so before you actually have to make that destocking trigger point or decision.
And it really helps too then to help you with that planning. You know, if you know you've got X, Y, Z worth of feed sitting there in front of these animals, you can say, okay, how many of them am I going to feed? What am I actually going to feed? What do I need to feed? I can look at that 3-month plan. I've got these are going to be, you know, moving through the pregnancy, they're going to get back up. So I can have that sort of a plan, and by locking them up too, what we tend to find there is that people start to manage those animals a bit better. They're really looking at sort of that, you know, sort of how are they actually performing and the like. We can see certain issues start to pop up, and a lot of the time those issues get remedied pretty quick. Just in the last few weeks we've had some issues with blue-green algae and the like in dams and stuff like that. You know, by putting them on that water, some of those issues are diminished as well. So managing that water resource is another thing that comes into it.
Yeah. Also classes of stock, so one of the first ones that I always encourage people is put weaners or younger stock into confinement so you can meet their nutritional requirements, get them growing, rather than having them running around on the paddock on poor quality feed. They're not growing and they just take a long time to mature and get to their weights.
And what we also see too, by taking that first step and feeding them early, we tend not to see those animals slip. So you're not having to chase as hard, not trying to lift those animals up in condition to get them into good enough condition to join up and things like that. So really by bringing them in, locking them up early, saves a lot of issues down the track.
I think one of the big ones I've seen this time around is around feed efficiency or feeding efficiency. So having the animals in one area, confined area, and people can feed large numbers of stock very quickly. You know, an hour, 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 sheep, they're feeding them under an hour, which then that means they can go off and do other things. Whereas if they're feeding in the paddock, it could be all day feeding, moving, going from paddock to paddock and feeding different stock. And in recent times with some of the field days we've been to, it's around feeding efficiency is the big thing that people are really calling as a big winner.
And it's huge. So I had a young bloke recently who was talking to me, and his comment was, we went through this period of the drought. He said Dad was going at it 7 days a week. He was going hard at it. He was going here, going there. And he said, we're not doing that anymore. He said, we're going to bring him in. We've got him here. We can control it. We're feeding over and done with an hour and a half, 2 hours in a day. We've started to get a bit of a life back. They've been able to break it down. And that's really one of those big things. By bringing them in, you're giving the animals what they need, and all of a sudden it's giving you life back. So, we do get people say to us, oh, I've all of a sudden seen more health issues with my animals than I have in the past because I've locked them up. And what I generally say to people is, that might be the case, you've seen some more issues, but all these issues have been there. You've just all of a sudden getting more eyes on them. So that's one. So we get that animal welfare outcome, but really the big feedback is that efficiency, and people that once they lock them up, they've got a plan. And having a plan is such a good thing for your own mental health, because all of a sudden you know what you're doing, you know what's coming. By having that plan, this is how much feed I've got to get, what's got to come. So it's been highly beneficial from those point of views. And then the flow on from that is, and the feedback I'm getting, and I'm sure Geoff's the same, is these areas I've been able to use them for something else. It just hasn't been feeding. I've been able to do this, I'm doing this. Producer, I was out there recently, he's using that as an education area for his weaner sheep. So all of a sudden, he weans, he brings them in there, he knows he's got it set up, he knows what he's doing, and those sheep are then educated, trained, don't get the nerve phobia, they're educated for when later on he might have a bad season, he can lock them up and feed them and they go on to it so much easier.
I think the other big one too is just having control. So when you're going through drought, it can be a fairly uncontrollable situation or get out of control pretty quickly. When we bring them stock into confinement, we have a much higher level of control of what's going on, what's being fed, and a closer look on the stock, because they're all contained to an area rather than wandering aimlessly across the landscape. We're definitely, we've had good inquiry probably for the last 3 years, but particularly this last couple of months, I think that has ramped up because we look like we're in a fairly dry season again. Or back end of summer was quite dry, it was also quite hot, and we were losing ground cover and water supply pretty quickly. So people were having to make some quick decisions about how they're going to manage their livestock going forward. So yeah, a lot of confinement inquiry over the last few months. I'm sure Brett's been the same.
Yeah, it's been consistent, and a lot of the time, and even just today, I've got messages just, yeah, we've had some rain down south, but we've still got a lot of pockets that are still dry. Just there before, just people asking to fine tune their operations with that confinement feeding message going, just double checking how many ewes can I lock up, how do I manage this, just there today. So it's a lot of inquiries, always sort of ticking through on it, and irrespective of the season, but definitely over the last 3 or 4 months, it's been full on.
Yeah, because any change often brings about hesitation. But I think just having that confidence to take that step. Often there's a bit of a financial barrier because you're under pressure due to drought, and cash flow can be very tight. And then to actually set up a confinement area, which doesn't actually have to take a lot of cost, it can, but you can do it quite cheaply if you've got the right information.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen that cost thing, and because, it's some of the feedback I get is people see a lot of these flashy setups, these automated things and things like that. And it's one of our key messages over the years, Geoff, is KISS, keep it simple, stupid. It doesn't have to look great, it just has to be functional. You don't have to have the best facilities. Some of the easiest things are some of the cheapest things that I've seen. And it's just a matter of working it through. And what we probably have seen is what has helped a lot with that adoption is when we've gone out to people's places and shown people some of the setups, and people are going, geez, I can adopt this, I can adapt that to what I've got and actually make that work here.
Yep.
That's sort of one of those key things that we're sort of seeing.
Yeah, definitely the visiting existing setups is the one key to get people on board and moving forward, adopting that practice. Where confinement really comes into its own is in recovery. So We get a breaking rain in March, which is not quite where it's probably a little bit earlier than ideal, but we won't knock it back. But being able to confine stock now and grow grass when it's been so dry is really important for the next 4 to 6 weeks to get a bit of recovery before we hit the winter, particularly in our sort of Eastern Murray, Eastern River, Riverina, Tablelands sort of country. It's really important now to get recovery and use your confinement area for that next short period, and it just speeds up recovery so much.
And also stops the issues. So there's some areas that are in the north of the state, some have just got a little bit of rain, we've got that green pick, and where we tend to find the big issues happening is now. Keeping them locked up, they're not chasing that green pick. Once they start chasing that green pick, they start stripping condition off. You know, you've managed them really well, but it allows that feed to, if we do get the follow-up rain to come, we get more bulk, we get more quality, you know, it's higher, more available. But we haven't sacrificed all the good work we've done by letting them out, chasing that green pick. And, you know, let's hope it keeps raining, positive, but glass not quite half full. If we don't get that and they start chasing that green pick, reintroducing them back onto the feed they've been on can be sometimes a real painful experience. And by keeping them locked up, you don't have that pain. We don't see the subclinical acidosis and things like that happening. So, you know, it really helps in this variable climate where we're able to manage those animals and just stop them chasing some of that green pick, which is when they tend to do a lot of damage to those pastures, when they just go and nail that green feed. So 100%, Geoff. Yeah.
Yep. The first point of call is maybe talking to one of our Drought Adoption Officers, but the Confinement Feeding Manual has a great list of tips in there and some ideas around how you might set it up either for sheep or cattle. And definitely a lot of our staff through the local land services or the Drought Adoption program, we can come on farm and help design a setup and talk them through the process. Fingers crossed we may go out of a dry period now, but the best time to build one is when you don't need it, so in the wet, in a better time. So you've got time to get it set up well. But in saying that, if people are under stress or under pressure and they need something set up quite quickly, we've got advice that can get them on the ground, get something on the ground pretty quickly.
Yeah, there's the manual, obviously, there's the staff that we've got, you know, so that's a resource. Also, there's some few webinars and the like that have been run, and we've also got some case studies and the like. Some of those webinars are quite handy because they've got different photos from different speakers and the like, so people can really get some ideas from some of those photos, and that's probably when we get up and give a lot of our presentations and the like. People want to see photos, they want to see what other people have done, because, you know, it's just trying to get your mind around how am I going to make this work for my situation. Yesterday I was on a property and, you know, steep, rugged, and I went in there and just went, wow, where am I going to set up an area here? You know, and that was the question she was going, I want to set up a feeding area. And all of a sudden I went, right, let's go here, let's go to the feeding areas. We want to keep it short time between A and B. And all of a sudden we went up, we're on a semi-flat area, I suppose is the nicest way to put it in this environment that we're in. And all of a sudden I'm going, look, you could set up a laneway here, you can come down off that fence. And she goes, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. And all of a sudden, yes, she did have the yards and everything over there. And all of a sudden we're talking about a laneway to get there. So, you know, lots of resources. Yep, we can go out on farm. We're not going to go out on every farm, but we've got a lot of staff now around the areas, our vets and the like, and everyone that are there to support and help farmers. So there's resources there plus our staff.
Yep.